In other words, let's put it this way. The fundamental understanding we have about the Bible is that the Bible is a book about Jesus. And I thought that was so succinct and so accurate, and it's exactly what Jesus is saying right here, that you search the scriptures thinking that in them you have life, but you fail to see that these are them which speak of me, right? Like, in other words, the right way to read the Old Testament and, of course, the New Testament is to understand that all of it is about Jesus. Welcome to Whitefields Community Church Sermon Extra. This is Nick Cady. I'm the lead pastor of Whitefields Community Church in Longmont, Colorado. I'm joined today by Pastor Jason Cralley, our executive pastor. Hey, Jason.
Hey, how's it going? I'm very happy to be here discussing this with you. So
glad to have you. You know, we're usually joined in these videos by Pastor Michael Payne, our worship pastor. Pastor Michael is currently in Europe doing some work with our missionaries regarding the crisis in Ukraine. So be praying for him. But Jason, I'm glad to have you sitting in. You'll be here next week too, so we get 2 weeks together.
That's right. So mark your calendars.
Yeah. So we're looking at John chapter 5, and the title of the message was, Do You Want to Be Healed? Which is a question that Jesus asked a crippled man at the pool of Bethesda there in John chapter 5.
Yeah, it was really great where you started out, and you spent most of the sermon, I noticed, in the first part of John chapter 5 about the miracle itself and kind of how Jesus went up to the man and, kind of asked him the question that I loved how you put it, that do you want to be healed? Do you like puppies? Do you like rainbows? That sort of thing. But I noticed there's quite a lot after the miracle itself, quite a lot of dialogue that I'd really like to see you kind of open up on more, talk about more. And what did it look like when he's talking to the Jews and defending himself? And what are some thoughts and insights on that?
Yeah, so one important thing you should know about the Gospel of John is that when when John talks about the Jews, he's not referring to like the Jewish people as a nation or Jewish people in general. He's specifically referring to the Jewish religious leaders, which would be the Pharisees, Sadducees, and the scribes, including the Sanhedrin, which is the council, the Jewish ruling council of that time and stuff like that. So that's the people he's referring to specifically when John uses this phrase, the Jews. And so what we see here in chapter 5, starting in this chapter and moving forward in the next few chapters, is Jesus is going to be coming into more and more increased confrontation from the part of the Jewish religious leaders. And we see why in this passage specifically, because they get on Jesus' case for healing this man on the Sabbath. Jesus, of course, knew that it was the Sabbath. He knew that they had a rule that you weren't allowed to carry your sleeping mat, and yet he told this man to carry his sleeping mat on the Sabbath after he healed him. It's incredible that the Pharisees don't seem to care that this man was healed. They only seem to care that he's breaking a rule, which isn't even in the Bible. It's just their arbitrary rule that they tried to come up with to make sure that they weren't breaking the rules in the Bible. But Jesus kind of provokes this conversation, and they accuse him of things. So you could put it this way. What you see here for the rest of the chapter is Jesus being put on trial, or them essentially attempting to put Jesus on trial. Their accusations are, number one, that he broke the Sabbath. But then Jesus, as we saw in verse 18, his retort to them is that, well, I'm not breaking the Sabbath because God is allowed to work on the Sabbath, and I'm God. And they said, well, that's why they persecuted him, because he made himself equal with God. That's verse 19. That's a really important verse because everything that comes afterwards is a dialogue, a discussion between Jesus and the Pharisees, religious leaders of that time, about his claim that he's God. And so one of the things they say to him is, basically, how can you say that you're God, right? Should we just take your word for it? In other words, they're saying, tell us why we shouldn't stone you to death for blasphemy right here and right now. And Jesus is saying, well, there's many reasons why. And he says, I'll give you 4. You don't just need to take my word for it. There are 4 witnesses. This is a really important thing in ancient culture, particularly in Jewish culture. You had to have at least 2 witnesses to corroborate any claims that you made. So Jesus says, here are my witnesses. First of all, he says, John the Baptist was a witness who came, and John the Baptist said that I'm the Messiah. So there we go. He's saying he's the Messiah. Is that the same as saying he's God? Not yet. We're going to see how Jesus bridges that conversation as well. So John the Baptist bore witness that I am the Messiah. He said, you know who else bore witness of me? My actions, right? So my actions prove that I'm the Messiah. Because remember, Isaiah chapter 35, verses 5 and 6 say that when the Messiah will come, the eyes of the blind will be open, the ears of the deaf will be open, the tongue of the mute will be loosed, and the lame will leap and run and things like that. So Jesus is saying, my actions bear witness to me. There's number 2. Number 3 is God the Father bore witness to me. When Jesus was baptized, you remember that a voice was heard from heaven that said, this is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. So there's God the Father bearing witness. And then finally, and not least, very importantly, Jesus says, the scriptures themselves bear witness to me. There's a very important verse there in chapter 5, verse 39 that says, you seek the scriptures because you think that in them you have life, but you miss the point that these are them which speak of me. In other words, all the Old Testament scriptures speak of me, and they bear witness. Basically, the way that I've fulfilled prophecies is another witness as to why you should believe in me. So there's Jesus giving these witnesses. And then what happens after that is masterful. Jesus turns the conversation. Whereas they bring 2 accusations against him, Jesus then brings 6 accusations against them. And I just want to run you through a summary of what those 6 accusations are. They're pretty strong charges that Jesus brings against them. The first one is found, and by the way, these are found in verses 37 through 47. Right, so we really only focused up to verse 19. This is verses 37 to 47. Here's what they say. Charge number 1, you have never heard the voice of the Father. That's in chapter 5, verse 37. Charge number 2, you do not have the word of God in you. That's verse 38. Charge number 3, you do not properly understand the scriptures. That's verse 39. Charge 4, you have rejected God's Son. That's verses 40 and 43. Charge number 5, you do not love God. That's verse 42. And finally, charge number 6 is you have rejected Moses. And that's a pretty stinging remark to them because they thought of themselves as the only ones in the world who were faithful to keep the words of Moses. And Jesus is saying, you haven't even done that. And that's in verses 44 through 47. He essentially says, if you don't believe the writings of Moses, where Moses wrote about me, then how can you say that you follow the writings of Moses? It's a really important thing, and this will be the last thing I say before I pass it back to you, is that in Deuteronomy chapter 18, there was a time when Moses spoke to the people of Israel. Remember, Deuteronomy is kind of like Moses' farewell speech as the people of Israel are about to cross into the Jordan, as Moses is about to walk off into the sunset, if you will. And he says there in chapter 18, he says, there is coming another prophet like me, but who is greater than me, and it is to him whom you should listen. And he said, when he comes, listen to him. And that's why many times people would ask him, are you the prophet? What do they mean by that? Which prophet are they referring to? They're referring to the prophet whom Moses promised, who is greater than him, who is to come. In other words, the Messiah.
I love that. I love that. It's basically he's teaching a master's class on defense and not only defense, but he's turning it into a prosecution on them. I think it's fascinating that he's defending kind of where they understand God to be speaking from, the scriptures. Here's the scriptures that you all grown up. Here's the scriptures that you've all learned. And, if you truly knew God, you would see me there. Here's all the wonderful places where I am. And I just part of me wishes that he would have actually gone through that, but maybe he did. We just don't have that recorded.
He did with his disciples, right?
Yeah,
in Luke
right.
24. Yeah.
Later on, I love that. And not only does he turn that, he defends himself there, but then he just masterfully crafts a defense and that turns into a prosecution, which, if you truly knew Moses, if you truly knew who God was, you would have seen me, and you've seen all these different things. And I think it's most significant there in verse 39. He says that you search the scriptures, and they do constantly. The Pharisees, they're constantly searching the scriptures for the Messiah. They're searching the scriptures for the truth, yet they're completely blind on so many different areas to see the Messiah standing in front of them, the Son of God standing in front of them, and they don't see that at all, even though this is their expertise.
I had a conversation with Roy Collins, who leads our adult Bible study on Sunday mornings.
Yeah.
And Roy, he taught biblical interpretation at Colorado Christian University for many years. And one of the things that Roy said in our conversation about biblical interpretation, he said, in other words, let's put it this way, the fundamental understanding we have about the Bible is that the Bible is a book about Jesus. And I thought that was so succinct and so accurate, and it's exactly what Jesus is saying right here, that you search the scriptures thinking that in them you have life, but you fail to see that these are them which speak of me, right? Like, in other words, the right way to read the Old Testament and, of course, the New Testament is to understand that all of it is about Jesus. That's why we have these T-shirts, right? It's all about Jesus. That's not just what we want our lives to be. It is, but we also understand, it's our fundamental understanding of what the Bible is about. The whole Bible is all about Jesus. And Jesus is saying, you guys have you've missed the forest for the trees, if you will. You're focused on stuff like how many pounds can you carry on the Sabbath? What can you carry a sleeping mat or not? And you've missed the entire point that even the Sabbath itself is a picture designed by God to point to me. And so I think that's really important for us as we read the Bible for ourselves. What is the point of any given passage? We need to be asking the question, how does this passage or the greater context of this particular verse, how does it point us to who Jesus is and what he came to do?
Yeah, I love that idea that a wise person once told me that Jesus is the hero of the story.
Yeah.
And if we're, even in the Old Testament, if we're reading through the Old Testament and we don't know who the hero of the story is, we're completely missing out on the Old Testament. We're completely missing out on the point of this passage if we don't understand who the hero is. And so many people do that today. They read through a passage and they don't see the hero. They just they're not focusing on the hero of the story. And if you leave the hero out, you're missing so much of the story. It's like, watching a movie that doesn't have a soundtrack or it's in black and white.
Yeah.
So
totally.
That's exactly what they were doing.
Yeah. So let's make sure we don't do that, eh?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, hey, thanks for listening to this. And you know what? If you have further questions or you have something you'd like us to respond to, just drop a question in the comments. We'd love to interact with you in the comments. If you found this discussion helpful, share it with somebody else, and we will see you again next week.